Thank you for being on our program. We
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. That's great. So to get started, how did you? What did you do before you were a firefighter?
I was a logger and spent 4 years in the Coast Guard, 5 different ships, and then went to a community college in Vancouver, went to a college in Portland, then went to the University of Washington. And then during the time I was at the University of Washington, I wanted a little extra cash because we were living on my wife's nursing wage as well as my GI Bill, but needed a little bit more money. We just bought a house. So we had a fire department in Woodinville just up the road from us, and they were asking for volunteers. So I stopped by just to ask, well, what's the deal?
Yeah.
And so I joined, and then after a period of time, I just suddenly fell in love with it. Working with the guys, it was mainly, being a group of guys who were trying to accomplish something really good. And so that's where it took off.
Wow, that's great. That's really interesting.
Thank you.
So you were a volunteer.
Correct.
And how many years were you a volunteer?
5 years.
5 years. Yeah. And then after you're volunteer, then what happened?
Then because I liked it so much, I decided that I was getting really bored with college. 4th year. Anyway, I got bored of college and I wanted something else to do. And so anyway, I decided I set my whole guts towards becoming a firefighter. And so anyway, I started working out, really busting buns. But remember, at the time, I was right out of college.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that test-taking mentality where when you read a question, you can actually put it in your brain what they're asking. So it was like snap, snap, snap.
Yeah.
Answers could fly off really easy as to what the questions on the test were. And so I built my strength back up. But I'd had a side job fencing as well.
Oh, okay.
So that's really heavy duty work. But building legs up and doing everything you had to do. And so did that. And then at the time they were doing tests for generally multiples, or at least 2 cities would go in together testing.
Oh, okay.
So they had a test 1 week for Mount Lake Terrace and Linwood, went and took that, passed that. And then the following week they had one for Kirkland Redmond. So took that. And then I was called in, I think, March or April of 77, that I'd been accepted in the Kirkland Fire Department.
Oh, wow.
And then I'd no sooner signed with Kirkland and I get a call from Mount Lake Terrace.
Oh.
Oh, well, I think I'll stick with Kirkland.
So why would that be? Why did you pick Kirkland to be the department that you wanted to
Well, I didn't really.
Okay.
I just wanted to be on a fire team. Although I had taken, with the volunteers, I had done a mini volunteer drill school in Kirkland.
Okay.
And so I knew some of the routine.
All right.
And so, but it was, hey, I was going for, just like guys do today, you got to open your whole breadth to a fire department. You're not guaranteed to get into the fire department you want to get into.
Yeah, it is still very difficult.
Exactly.
To get into the fire service.
I think there was only 125 people that tested for the Kirkland Redmond.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Do you have any idea how many people test nowadays?
Hundreds.
Thousands.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, it's not uncommon to have 5,000 people go out and
for
take
a
a
position.
Test. Yep.
Well, it was a job. It was a good job,
Yep.
a damn good job, good paying, lots of action. You're not sitting around with a piece of paper and punching a computer all day long.
Yeah. Wow, that's great. Did you go through an academy?
Yes. It started in July of 77, and that was in Bellevue.
Okay. All right. And once you were done with the academy, then what was your work schedule like?
Let's see. Started out at Station 27. That was with Langlois and Dana Olson. And that was, if I remember, 12 hours a day, 4 days a week, and then 3 days off.
Mm-hmm. All right. And you said that you've been with the Kirkland Fire Department for 19 years.
Correct.
And in that 19-year period, what was it that you really enjoyed about being a firefighter?
Camaraderie and fighting fire.
Yeah.
And we used to have a lot of fires back then.
Yeah.
A lot. Before smoke detectors came in.
Okay.
And then it went from 90 a year down to maybe 9 a year.
Right. And also probably before sprinkler suppression systems.
Right. There was none of that back then.
Yeah. And everything was probably all wood buildings.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. And so they would catch on fire, and somebody would call the fire department, and you'd go.
And we might get there to save a part of it.
Yeah. And did you ever get to ride on the tailboard?
Yes, at 27.
Okay.
Scarier than hell.
Why is that?
Bouncing around, and if you're not tied in, that was before somebody fell off in Seattle and killed themselves. You weren't strapped in, you were just hanging onto the rails.
Wow.
And bouncing the tail end of that truck bounces really good.
Yeah. What about weather conditions?
Didn't matter. There was one, when I was a volunteer, they had a hardware store catch fire in Duval. So we had to go from Woodinville to Duval. And I got there just the truck was leaving, grabbed my gear and was hanging on to my gear and jumped on the tailboard. And off we go in sub-zero weather. And finally, the officer knew I was back there, finally stopped and let me into the cabin. And I was damn well frozen to death. Anyway, yeah.
That's very interesting. What about when, what kind of special, like firefighters sometimes have a tendency to be in like special roles and maybe different assignments, maybe on the truck company or maybe they do things in tools. What kind of things did you do in your 19-year career at Kirkland that was kind of that type of assignment?
Oh, let's see. Well, I was in charge of stores for a number of years.
What does that mean?
That means bunker gear, toilet paper, paper towels, all your different solvents, etc. First aid gear, from bandages to Band-Aids to you name it, Ipecac. So it was just everything the department used, I had to get stored. And then after I left, Dana Olson got it.
All right. So you talked about these special assignments. Was there any other special assignments that you remember being a part of in your career there at Kirkland Fire?
Well, it wasn't really special assignment throughout the department, but basically small equipment repair and maintenance. Okay. It was everybody could do it, but nobody wanted to do it. And I just happened to like fiddling with small tools and stuff, seeing how stuff operates. So whenever we had something chain needed sharpened, serviced on chainsaws or any tool, then I'd just get it and do it with the spare time. But it wasn't an assigned job. And then other than that, not really that I can think of. We did have at a time, I don't know if it's still carried out, but we had on, I believe, Christmas and Thanksgiving, we'd gather food from different organizations and stuff. We'd have roast turkeys, hams, that kind of stuff in baskets, and to any, throughout the city, we'd go deliver these baskets on holidays to people who really needed the food.
So Pat, why don't you tell us some stories? I mean, I know you're full of stories and you have a lot of things that you could share with us.
Yes, they call it BS.
They're called what?
BS.
Oh, good.
Or sailor's tales.
All right.
Let's see. One that was involved, you and me, we were both on Bart's crew, Don Bartleson's crew. And Don Bartleson would not wake up in the middle of the night for any reason. I mean, you could drag him out of his bed and he'd lay there on the floor flopping. He would not get out of bed, and we had a call. And at the time, Tim and I had this agreement where one day or one shift, I would write down address on a piece of paper, and next shift, he would write the address down.
Because we didn't have a printer.
We didn't have a printer. We didn't have anything. It was write it on a piece of paper and use that. Well, this one particular evening, after a whole day load of calls, we were both just exhausted. I mean, I can remember just barely getting out of bed. We went to wake Bart up. Bart would not get up. Come on, Bart. Come on, Bart. We got a call. We got an aid call. Let's go. Go, go, Bart. So I said, screw it. Come on, Tim. Let's just go. So we jumped in the aid car, and we're both like just brain dead. Jumped in the aid car, and I says, okay, what was the address? And Tim says, you didn't write the address down? I went, no. Didn't you write it down? No. Well, what do we do now? I says, just let's leave the station and we'll just start making rights. And eventually we will run into the place. So we turned right out of the station, this out of station 22, went up the hill to the first road, turned right, went down to the next right, turned right, and all of a sudden, this lady comes out of a house covered in blood, screaming and hollering, at which point we just stopped, going, what in the hell? We must be here. Yeah. And Tim knows the rest of the story. So.
That is so funny, Pat, because I do remember that story. And I remember that this lady comes running out, and she's covered in blood, and she's like against the window of our aid car, and we're freaking out. You're looking at me freaking out. I'm looking at you freaking out, and you're yelling at her, "Get off of my aid car! Get away from my window!" And so she backed up, and you rolled the window down, and you said, "What's going on?" And she said, "Well, somebody got hurt. He's cut. He's bleeding, and you need to come help him." And so you turned and looked at me, and you said, "Well, I guess we're at the right place." And so we went ahead and went in there and took care of the patient. But no, that is a funny story.
That's pure shithouse luck, or something must have clicked upstairs.
Yep.
Go right, go right, go right. Let's go.
Yep, exactly. Yep, that's funny. Pranks. Did you ever do any pranks, or did anybody do any pranks on you, Pat?
Well, according to my sources, I understand they're not allowed anymore in the fire department without severe penalty. Yeah, unfortunately or fortunately, that was part of the camaraderie of the fire department. It was all in good jest. Everybody was invited to do it, basically, unspoken. But yeah, there were a few good ones. This one was on me. At station 22. I was up in the pool room, what used to be the pool room. I don't know what it is now, but up in the pool room shooting some balls. And so lunch break got over with, so I came out of the lunchroom, and that morning I brought my boat, which I called Orca, because it was black and it had a center console, and brought that to the station to do little maintenance or something. And so anyway, I had it parked clear against the south wall of station 22. So I come out, start down the stairs, and across the entire length of the side of my boat is painted in white, "Save the Whales." And Dane Olson and Larry Peabody are standing there just cracking up, dying. Needless to say, I was about ready to kill somebody.
Yeah, I bet.
I go running down. I was going to tear them both apart. And they'd taken plastic sheeting and put it across the side of the boat and taped it to where you couldn't see it from a distance, and did that. That was a good one. That was good.
Yeah.
At station 27 with Ed Ulrich, and he had a Subaru. But he had to drive from Belfair all the way up to Kirkland every shift and then back home. And so one day, what I ended up doing is, I don't know why, is I made a rudder and a propeller on metal to where the propeller spin and the rudder would go back and forth. And so then I climbed underneath the Subaru and mounted it like underneath where the back seats were, to where when you were standing 20 feet back, you could see this thing going and moving around with the current.
Oh.
But anywhere else, unless you look directly underneath the car, well, he drove it like that for almost 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Wondering where the hell is this noise coming from before he finally found the thing.
Oh, that's funny.
I can't remember what rank Gary Reitnauer was. He wasn't a battalion chief by that time. But we were doing rappelling practice on the back side of Station 27 off the hose tower. And so we'd all done our rappel down the side of the building. And so Gary was last one. So he comes over, and we're holding tension and stuff. He comes over, so we release him just enough to where he flips upside down. And so he's hanging there. I said, let's tie it off and have a cup of coffee. So we tied it off to the engine, tied the line off to the engine, went in and got a cup of coffee. Of course, we came right back out again.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling he was pissed. And then we let him down.
If you had like some words of wisdom or maybe some advice for a firefighter, maybe a new firefighter or
A probie.
maybe, or a probie.
Probie, yeah. Well, a word of wisdom when I went into the military, my dad gave me, he says, keep your mouth shut, your eyes and ears open. And you do that, you'll make it a long ways.
Yep. One thing I tell guys, and I think one of you guys shared it with me when I got in the fire service, when I got with Kirkland, was you're building a foundation.
Correct.
Like you're building a building, and that first year is your foundation.
Correct. Yep.
And from there, you're able to build a nice 30-story building.
Correct.
So speaking of 30 years, you made it 19 years.
Correct.
What what happened that made you not be able to finish your longevity of your career?
In 95, I had a vertebrae or a disc blowout at L345 in my lower back, which it took 4 days before I could get into surgery, and the whole time my spinal cord was strangled to the point I could not feel my left leg. And so went in for that surgery, and after that, the leg had to come back as much as it would, and that ended the career right there.
Mm-hmm. How difficult was that for you to go through that and have to say you were not going to be able to be a firefighter anymore?
Primarily it was, not being able to work with the guys anymore.
Yeah.
That was the hard part.
Yeah.
The rest of it, I could live with.
Yeah.
I'd seen enough blood and guts and everything else where it was plenty enough.
Yep.
But it was leaving the crews and camaraderie and the hijinks and everything else,
Yep.
and it's involved with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I understand that you had something to do with the bell that's at Station 22 that is kind of on display.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could tell us about that.
Yeah, Bob Ely had the fire bell off, I believe it was the American La France, that he wanted to preserve as a showpiece in Station 22. So he came, brought the bell, and asked me, he says, we need to make some kind of display out of this. So I brain farted around a little bit and says, okay, yeah, I can come up with something. So anyway, ended up coming up with this design for a platform that would mount against the wall at Station 22. And went ahead and mounted the belt to it and, dressed it all, did my Coast Guard polish on the thing, got it nice and brilliant, and then took gold foil and pushed into the eagle that was on top of the belt and just covered that with gold foil.
Wow.
And then mounting it was real interesting because where I was mounting it, I had no clue what was behind the wall. I was just guessing where the studs were. And so anyway, ended up getting it mounted, and he was real tickled with it. And it was a showpiece for, whenever we had, it was always open to the public. So it was a nice showpiece, and he was pleased with it. So.
And it's still there.
That's a good thing to know, too. Whoever takes it off, my signature's on the inside.
Oh, is that right? Oh, good.
And the date that it was, mounted.
All right. We'll have to take a look at that.
You'll have to tear a hole in the wall.
Oh, well, maybe I won't do that then. Talk about being a driver. You taught me how to drive the apparatus. And I know that there's a lot of things that you taught me that I continue to do because that's the way I was taught. And
that's the way it should be.
Why don't you talk a little about what you think makes a good driver?
Probably number one, knowing your machine inside and out. We're not talking just jump in, fire up, and here's how you do this at the pump. That kind of stuff. It's knowing your machine. Everything from what the engine's capable of. It's in detail. You want to know your machine. And then what it's capable of doing. That's primary right there. And that really wasn't taught to me. That's something through experience, I learned. I wanted to know more and more and more what can go wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just made it a point with myself to know everything about the rig that I possibly could. That's like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. You have a picture of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. It was a Ford chassis and box, but it had a cab, a front over cab that had this handle in the back of it where you pull down to lock it into position. And number one, Dwight Schultz and I took it out at Station 22 one day, and we headed down to the lake, and we got down to Lake Washington Boulevard, and we come to a stop. Well, one or the other of us had not latched that thing. The whole cab went boom. we're sitting there looking at the ground.
Yep.
So anyway, we were able to get out, push it back up, and latch it in position. But Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, who Jack Shinner is the one who named it, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. I put that thing into a 360-degree circle, dead center on top of Northeast 124th on a call on a wet day. 300 and yeah, that had me going right on the top. Traffic, fortunately, had stopped on both sides, so I had free clearance to spin around and dance around. So that was a fun truck. Everybody should have the opportunity to drive that thing at high speed. Well, I do remember a story that involved Tim Sears, myself, and Mark Halen. And it was the Juanita Creek fire.
I think
or
so.
Juanita Creek apartment fires. But anyway, it was... that
was a big fire.
Oh, it was big. Yeah, it took out the whole building.
Yeah.
There was, it didn't take it out, but there was smoke damage from one end to the other. That's before they had fire separations between apartments. And so it had just traveled down the whole length of the thing. I think there was probably 6 or 8 apartments in that one building. It was a 2-story. So anyway, we arrived, Haschek told us to ladder this one apartment, so we laddered it, and Tim and Mark went in first. We had to climb up onto the lanai or deck on the 2nd floor, and so climbed up there. They went in first, and then I got up there, and they were already both in the bathroom. Apparently there was a fire break in the bathroom where they were fighting through the ceiling, and so I went in, and I, for whatever God unknown reason, I opened the front door of the apartment. And so then when I did that, I backed up, went into the bathroom and seeing what they're doing. And then I turned around and looked out of the bathroom into the living room, and I saw the roof go. And I turned around and I told, Tim was on the hose nozzle. So I told Mark, I says, get out of here. drug him to the door and told him go. And then I went back in to grab Tim. Of course, Tim's really stubborn. He's having a ball. So I had to grab him, drag his ass out, and I told him, get the hell out of here. And just about that time, the roof collapsed, and fortunately it hung up on a countertop, kitchen countertop, and hung up on that door. And we were able to scoot underneath the roof and get into the hallway. Mm-hmm. And of course, Tim wouldn't let loose of the hose. So I had to pull it away from him and say, get the hell out of here. So we went down, told Mike what happened. He says, go to the next apartment. So we got the ladder, moved it over to the next apartment, had a new hose line all charged. And they went back up, same scenario. I got up there and I went in. I opened the front door again because I knew I had to save their ass in the last one. And went back in the bathroom, and they're doing the same damn thing. Apparently, the ceiling had been breached, so they were doing the same exact thing in there. And I turned around, I looked, and the second ceiling went, just, okay, out of here. Same MO, except Tim left the hose this time. And we got the hell out, and that was the end of our firefighting day.
Yep.
The worst part of that whole thing was, after all exhaustion, cleaning up everything that we had to do. Next day, I was driving to Nia Bay for a week-long halibut fishing trip.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Thank God we got halibut, but I was dead tired for
But that's when we were working 24-hour shifts.
That's true.
Not 48s.
Yes. Yeah.
Now we're doing the 48s.
I would not want to do a 48. Personally.
Why is that?
Too exhaustive. If you're at a station that actually gets calls, because unfortunately I was stationed at 26 one time where we were having 9 to 13 calls a day. And it was me, Brian Vadney, and Bob Holmes, and 9 to 13 fire calls a day. By the end of the day, we were just gone. There was days I do not remember getting home, period.
Wow.
It's blank. Matter of fact, one morning I came home and I had a honey extractor, a manual honey extractor when I raised bees. And so I thought, I've got 1 frame or 2 frames left. Let's just get it out of the way. So I started cranking, getting it up to speed, and it's going around. I noticed that the walk-down device had come loose, just sitting. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to stop it because I could send the whole thing off. So I reached over to tighten that wing nut, and the handle came around and nailed me on top of the right finger and drove it through or into that bolt. Mm. And I'm sitting there. This is how brain dead I was. I'm sitting there. My dogs had all disappeared. I must have done some heavy-duty sailor talk. Mm. And I cannot move my fingers. I finally grabbed it and I pulled it off that bolt. And of course, all this gunk, it wasn't bleeding, but there was fat and tissue hanging from it. So I went out, got some electrical tape, wrapped it around there, got in the truck, drove down to the doctor's, fixed me. And I've still got a big bump on the top of this finger where that handle hit me. That's how brain dead you were. Yeah. And then I tried to get 25, the run cards changed. Because 25 was having 1 call a day. Mm-hmm. And we were running right down into, what is the intersection down there?
The junction?
The junction. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they were much closer. Mm-hmm. And Gary Reitnauer is the battalion chief. He says, no, we're not changing the run cards. I'm going, Gary, look at what we're doing here. Yeah. Honestly, I was starting to get burned out. Yeah. And I know Brian and Bob Holmes were too. Mm-hmm. Really burned out. Yeah. Wow. So, but it is what it is.
Yep. When you think of a fire, mm-hmm. which fire is kind of a predominant fire that you think of? Like maybe one of the biggest fires that you saw as...
The biggest fire was Holy Catholic Church.
Okay.
I was there after pretty much everything was done. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I got a picture here of it. But that was probably the biggest fire, other than the forest fire that we had.
Where was the forest fire?
You know where that great big bowl is? Concrete bowl?
Oh, yes.
Okay. It was
Up in
right,
22's area, in the watershed.
right back there behind, right back on the backside.
Okay.
I don't remember how many rigs we had there. I actually didn't have to fight it, thank God, because I'd fought forest fire up in Alaska when I was logging. But and forest firefighting is not my thing. Leave it to Hobie. You can have it. But I don't remember how many inches, but it was, some kid or so. I don't know what started, but I was at the engine just pumping.
Yeah.
And so that was the biggest fire, but Holy Catholic Church was probably the biggest structure fire because it did some serious damage.
Yeah.
Some damn kids playing around is what they determined eventually and caught the kid.
Well, there's stories in the fire department and Pat Donnelly's name comes up in those stories.
And they're all true.
They're all true. I'm sure they are. How would you want to be remembered in the Kirkland Fire Department?
As a guy, pretty much got along with everybody, and any knowledge that I passed along, I hope it goes a long ways and improves with the future. That's the best you can do, is pass on what you know and teach it the best you can. People run with it.
That's great. Well, Pat, I think we've exhausted our time here, and I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity to hear your story.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
And hear your thoughts and hear your funny stories and everything. We really, really appreciate that. On behalf of the Kirkland Fire Department, thank you for everything that you did for the department and for the city and for the citizens for
it was my pleasure.
19 years.
It was my pleasure. Wish it could have been more, but it is what it is.
All right.
So, okay, you're buying the beer.
So that is the end of our episode of Firefighter Stories. And again, thank you to Pat Donnelly for taking the time to talk to us about his career as a firefighter. If you have any questions that you have for Pat, feel free to write them down in the comments, and I'll get them to him. And I know that he'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.